A legend of British MMA and one of the finest minds in combat sports, Dan the Outlaw Hardy. Good to sit down and chat. How are things with you today, Dan?
All good, mate. Yeah, all good. All good. Very busy trying to get a new gym open and trying to wind down for Christmas at the same time. But 2022 is going to be a good year, I think.
Fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about the gym. Talk to me about the facility and some of the aspects of that, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a place at the moment which it's got a small matted area and a cage, and it's been fine for us up until this point. But now the team's getting to sort of 20, 30 people deep. We need more mat space and better facilities. And we've been talking about moving into a bigger place for a while. So the one we've found, it's over 2 stories. It's on the high street in Loughborough, within walking distance from the university. The downstairs is going to be strength and performance, so you're going to be able to do any kind of physical conditioning there that you need to. And then upstairs will be entirely martial arts. We'll have a big matted area with a cage wall. We're going to get a boxing ring in there and a load of punch bags and stuff. But it's basically a one-stop shop. It's everything that you need for being a high-level combat sports athlete. That's the plan, and it'll be good to have a facility like that to grow a team within.
Was that always the aspiration to have a huge facility where all aspects of martial arts, strength and conditioning, and as you mentioned, was covered in one area?
Yeah, no doubt. Because I mean, if you look back to when Jimmy and I were coming up, we were traveling from one place to the next. You know, we'd train at a gym in Nottingham, and then we'd drive over to the Leicester Tigers facility to do strength and conditioning, and then to Mansfield to do jiu-jitsu. And you know, the dream was always, imagine if we could just come to one building and do everything here. And what's frustrating is that we've got all the knowledge now, like we've got all the coaching staff and all the information we need. It's actually now having the space to apply it. And we've made do with the space that we've got, but now we're looking to grow into a much bigger team. We need a much bigger facility.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. But as you mentioned there, we're recording at the back end of 2021 in what has been a fantastic year for MMA and combat sports more generally. We haven't seen as much disruption through COVID or anything like that. Just off the top of your head, Dan, give me perhaps some of the highlights in the combat sports or the MMA world that come to mind.
Oh, I mean, I think we've had a couple of champions really establish themselves. I think, I mean, obviously, what Usman's done over the period of time that he's had to establish himself as a champion, get the wins that he has. And so we've also been improving from one win to the next. Yeah. I mean, Trevor Whitman's had a fantastic year in his own right with Rose as well. But then, you know, the new faces that have come through, anytime the sport goes through a bit of a turbulent time, it creates opportunities for people to keep putting their hand up and taking fights. And, you know, we've had fighters like Khamzat Chimaev emerge as well. So I think that's been a really exciting time. Allowed a few fighters to get a lot of work, as well as you know, giving a few other fighters maybe some downtime to focus on growing their techniques and not feeling as rushed to get back in there. But the other thing as well, which I think is a benefit for everybody, is just generally how combat sports has opened up a lot. You know, other organizations doing really well. Cage Warriors following on through the pandemic. PFL are doing great things. One Championship still running events in empty arenas. You know, and then the whole Jake Paul craziness that has come alongside combat sports, I think, has been beneficial as well. It's an exciting time. It's an exciting time to be within combat sports. And I think what we've learned throughout the pandemic in 2021 is that it doesn't really matter what happens. Combat sports and the promoters within it are the ones that will keep sport generally moving around the world. You know, even like the betting companies have been saying, "Oh, we're so thankful that the UFC got back to it because we didn't have anything to push towards people." So I think it's been a sport defining 12 or 18 months for us, and I think certain people within that have taken a real lead. But overall, I think just generally we've taken a big level up.
Yeah, 100%. It's actually funny when you think about, and it's been such a strange time the last 18 months. I must caveat what I'm going to say by saying that, but that UFC card in Jacksonville, the one headlined by Ferguson and Gaethje, what a strange thing it is to look back on that and some of the fighters that performed on them early cards and how the chains would begin to get moved in sports by the UFC, and then now, as you mentioned, with all the other leagues and all the other sports in combat sports more generally, it's been 2021 has probably been a better year. Well, of course, it's been a better year, but yeah, you're right. MMA and combat sports were at the forefront of getting sports moving again.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's a strange thing to think, but then when you actually look at the events and what you need to put on an event, especially if it's a closed door event where you're not trying to stack a fight card with 15 fights. I mean, Cage Warriors have done a great thing with the trilogies that they've done, where they've done shows back to back for 3 days, or just the most recent one, the double header. I think it's changed the way that we understand how shows can be put together. And we also understand that our audience is largely online as well. Yeah. So that helps. We don't need the big crowd atmosphere like you would at a football game, because you go to a football arena where there's no crowd and it feels like Sunday league. It's empty. It feels very odd. Yeah. It doesn't have the grandiose feel that it does when there's a big crowd in there. Whereas what we've learned from the Apex and from Fight Island is, as long as you've got good lights and cameras, the whole building could be empty, and you only need those 2 individuals and the officials around them to run the thing. We're far more adaptable than I think we realised, and that's given a lot of confidence to a lot of promoters to try new things.
Something you mentioned there, one man's name who I very briefly want to mention is the famous, or perhaps the infamous, Jake Paul, and obviously his fight against one of your online rivals of late, Dan, in Tyron Woodley. Has that perhaps changed or affected your thoughts or your feelings towards a potential Woodley matchup?
I just don't see the value in it, really. I don't think that there's the interest that there was before. I mean, it's unfortunate him losing to Jake Paul, from a bigger picture. I do think it will affect his legacy and the way people view him as a combat sports athlete, which I do genuinely feel quite sad for him for that, because of what he achieved in MMA, and that he's basically foregone that legacy for a pocket full of cash, which maybe is a different conversation around Jake Paul and what else he's doing for mixed martial arts, and kind of poking fun at the money that can be made and the money that is being made. But I mean, Tyron's at the tail end. Well, he's been at the tail end of his career for a while. I just never got the impression that he really wanted to be in there, and I think that showed with his performances. I wouldn't have wanted to see him get brutally knocked out like that by Jake Paul. Absolutely not. But I did think Jake Paul would beat him a second time. I thought he'd be able to outpoint him. I just think it shows you really, how different boxing is to MMA, and how easy it is to hack the system. Yeah. I mean, what people need to realize about Jake Paul, and I have no issue with Jake Paul at all. I think he's a very interesting individual. Everybody in combat sports can learn something from Jake Paul, because he stepped into combat sports and he's pretending to do combat sports in amongst people that are very legitimate combat sports athletes. Yeah. But the thing that he's done so well is to garner an audience. And that's the one thing that, if we look at MMA, if we look at combat sports, what's the difference? The one person that can garner that interest. Yeah. In boxing, it was Floyd Mayweather, and now it's Canelo. And in mixed martial arts, there's no one comparable to Conor. But it's not what they do in the combat sports arena that defines them. It's what they do outside. It's how they market themselves. And Jake Paul has done more than 50% of the work with his Instagram. Yeah. It's quite amazing what he's done, and a lot of people can learn from him. But I also think appetites have changed around combat sports, and people are more interested in the actual individuals that are fighting and not really what they're fighting for.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure where you stand on the whole YouTube thing. Presumably, I would presume you slightly more of a purist who prefers the higher level of combat sports. But what I would say is, he's tapped into a market, and he, as you mentioned there, he's sometimes goaded, he's sometimes belittled some of the MMA community and some of the fighters, and talked about fighter pay. But he's been the ultimate troll. He's learned off Floyd Mayweather. He's learned off Conor McGregor. He's tapping into that market of people tuning in to hope that he loses, and that, as we've seen in recent history, as I mentioned with some of the names there, that is an effective method.
Yeah, 100%. And Floyd Mayweather realized it so well. Back before he was Pretty Boy, there was a point in his career where he became Money Mayweather. Mm. That was like. And the thing is, if you go back to those previous fights when he was Pretty Boy Floyd Mayweather, he was a different fighter. He was showing up to fight, to try and knock people out. He was taking unnecessary risks. It was like all of a sudden a penny dropped halfway through, literally a penny dropped, a few pennies dropped. And I think he went, oh, hang on a minute. You're actually not interested in the actual performance itself. You want the illusion that the person that you're rooting for is either going to win or the person you're rooting against is going to lose. And he tapped into that perfectly. And I think I learned this from watching ice hockey fights, to be honest. I remember going to watch the Nottingham Panthers, and like, I can go home tonight and I can watch the UFC pay-per-view, which is going to have the best MMA fighters in the world on it. But when I'm standing in my seat and I'm watching two guys that are hockey players, and one of them is wearing the shirt for my team, like, that stirs something within me that I don't get from many MMA fights, from many combat sports. But that's what Conor McGregor does so well. That's what Floyd Mayweather does so well, is they create that feeling. And it's creating a reason for the person watching to be invested in the fight. For or against, betting or casually, it doesn't matter. They want to be invested in it, and they want to live vicariously through these fighters, feel those successes, or poke at their friend when their fighter's not having that same success. It's giving people a reason to watch. And Jake Paul came into combat sports giving people a reason to watch him generally. So it doesn't really matter what he does. If he decides he's going to be a show jumper next, he'll have a big crowd of people watching that as well. It doesn't matter what he's doing, it's how he's doing it.
Yeah, of course. Now, I want to turn the conversation back to yourself and away from that guy from California. You've kind of teased the idea over the last couple of years. I remember watching the episode on the Joe Rogan Experience of your potential comeback, and as I mentioned there, with Woodley as a potential opponent. Has there a particular reason why the comeback hasn't happened over the last couple of years? And if so, what are some of the names that you are perhaps looking at on the Outlaws hit list, if you like?
Well, I mean, there's been a few reasons why. One of them has been time. Since I stopped competing, I started commentating, and I was on and off planes every weekend. And when I wasn't, I was down at studios in London. So I got myself into a cycle where there really wasn't a moment to breathe and to stop. Every time the question was asked to me, I would always say, yeah, of course. Of course I want to fight again, because that's what's in my soul. And, if I wake up on a day and I've got nothing to do, my focus is on martial arts. It's on mine and on generally martial arts. And that's what I want to dedicate my time to. And there's no better way of doing that than being in the training camp yourself. Even if I'm training fighters, it's still not the same process of actually internalizing the process and living through it. As far as the actual coming back, I mean, I had conversations with the UFC a couple of times, and they were keen on me announcing that I was coming back to fight. But then, we'd have conversations of opponents, and they'd offer me Jim Miller, they'd offer me Joe Lozon, because the idea was at 55, and they just weren't fights that I was interested in. I'm not in the mindset that I'm going to have another 10 fights. I might have one, I might have two, I might have three. But if I'm only having 2 or 3, I want to make sure the opponent is someone that gives me that excitement of, I'm going to get up this morning and train. Because I love Joe Lozon, I love Jim Miller, I love watching them both fight, but I wouldn't want to punch either of those guys in the head. That point of my career where I'll fight anybody has passed, because I don't have the time to prepare for anybody. Not anybody's worth my time. And I don't want that to sound like I'm disrespecting anybody. It just needs to feel right for me, right? Tyron Woodley was exciting because I know he genuinely doesn't like me, and I think that would be a fun process of teasing him and then beating him in the fight. But if I'm actually looking at opponents now, it's the likes of John Wayne Parr, the likes of Nicky Holskin, to be able to share a ring or a cage with a great like Shinya Aoki or Eddie Alvarez or Buakaw or someone like that. Doesn't even really matter the combat sport. I'd fight Anderson Silva if they offered it me. I'm in a position where I can live out a dream that I would if I was a martial arts nerd. And that martial arts nerd in me, the idea of being able to share a ring with someone like Anderson Silva or John Wayne Parr, I understand from people's perspective outside of combat sports. They're looking at me and going, oh, you think you could beat Anderson Silva? You think you can beat John Wayne Parr? I do, but it's not about that. It's about being in there with such a high-level respected martial artist and having myself tested by those people. That's an honor. That would be an honor to do that. As it would with Tyron Woodley, boxing or MMA or whatever. It would be an honor to share that space with him, because it would be a challenge for me.
Is that one aspect of it, is perhaps the purity of the martial art is about, as you mentioned, like two warriors from perhaps the samurai times, going in there testing the skills, but that what it being about. You're not in any way, shape, or form interested in contendership and interested in ranking. It's a one or two or a handful of potential super fights against super opponents.
Yeah, that's it. And none of them are opponents that are, at the top of their game now. I'm far from the top of my game, but I'm in a place where I feel like I can be competitive with other people that are in the same bracket as me. I look at someone like Nate Diaz or Cowboy, and I see myself beating those guys as well. But it's the benefit would be stepping in there and facing that person and trying to beat that person, not what doors would open afterwards. Like, I wouldn't want to fight a top 5 fighter in the UFC because that would open the door to a belt, because I'm not really bothered about the belt, which means that I'm not really bothered about the people in the lead up to it and what their ranking is, because they either interest me to fight or they don't. And that's really what it is for me. It's finding the right circumstance, the right opportunity. Honestly, the thing that's slowing me down right now is the travel restrictions and the issues with that, because the conversations I'm having with at the moment, the Tyron Woodley fight would have been in London, which would be perfect. But then one championship is largely based in Singapore, so that would be that would require some efforts to travel, as would fighting in the US. So, I mean, I don't know. It's just, I was expecting to be able to get it off the ground this year and get a couple of fights, but then the world keeps changing its stance on things. So I don't know, man. I don't know. My main thing is to get myself in shape so I can just step in there, and then when the right opportunity presents itself, then I'll do it. But as we said about 2021, combat sports has changed so much. Who can predict what's going to happen next year? I just need to be ready for it.
Just finally on the specific opponents, and as you mentioned, I'm not here like a journalist trying to poke and prod, but does the style of the potential opponent affect it? Would you prefer a more striking based matchup?
I think it makes sense for me to start off with that. Because it's it's 50% less of a training camp that you have to dedicate to technique. I mean, I could focus on the things that I've already got fairly well refined, instead of having to get back into the wrestling and grappling stuff. That would take a bit of that would take probably another 3 or 6 months to get me really sharp in those ranges. Whereas I could be fit in 6 weeks and step in and fight the majority of strikers on the planet. I feel, even if I was fighting someone that's going to give me a good hiding, I at least know enough to journeyman it and keep myself safe through it. So to build on that is not a great deal. Like, this is why the order in my head made sense of Tyron Woodley at 190, and then I go down a weight class and start looking at fighting John Wayne Parr, which would be at 170. And then once I was in and around that 170 bracket, that opens up doors for other fighters in one championship, the likes of Holskin or Aoki or Alvarez, or options outside of combat sports as well. I mean, 170 is the sweet spot, really. If you can find yourself around there, there's a lot of super fights to be had. And I'm not undersized. I could fight upwards of middleweight, and if I needed to, I could get myself down to 155. So it's less about the rule set and more about the logical progression through. Like, if I have 4 fights next year and I want to do boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing, and MMA, it makes sense to finish doing MMA. I got offered a bare knuckle match, and I wouldn't not do bare knuckle, but it would make no sense doing bare knuckle and then going back and doing MMA afterwards. It just wouldn't make sense that way. So I was hoping that the Tyron Woodley things was going to come to pass, but since he's still sleeping from the weekend, I'll move on to my next option and see where I can get with this one championship thing.
When you retired all them years ago, Dan, I think there was a little bit of clamour from fans to a little bit of perhaps disappointment, I think would be the correct word, that Dan Hardy was leaving the game. In the back of your mind, did you always feel that potentially there could be one more? And if so, was it an itch that you felt that you may have to scratch at some point?
Honestly, I never retired in my head. Okay. In my head, I was never like, no, I'm done fighting now. Like, I was actually closer to retirement before my last fight than I was after it. Like, coming out of the Chris Lytle fight, going into the Dwayne Ludwig fight, like I thought the Chris Lytle fight was going to be my last one because I'd kind of fallen out of love with it. The whole training process would become a drag, and so I was actually closer to retiring there. When I went in and beat Ludwig and then beat Sadala in Nottingham afterwards, in my head I was like, oh, okay, well let's push through and have a few more. And then I don't know where the last 8 or 10 years has gone, if I'm honest. It has moved so quickly, and I genuinely don't feel like I've aged. Like I actually feel younger, fitter, and physically healthier now than I did after my last fight. So, I mean, maybe there's a bit of an illusion going on in my own head as well. But I never retired in my own head. I don't think I would, to be honest. I don't think there's a point where I go, you know what, I'm not fighting anymore. Yeah. Because I think I got into this as a martial artist, not as a combat sports athlete. So in my mind, I was always going to be a martial artist, and retiring from fighting is like retiring from martial arts, and that's something I would never do. There's always the possibility to fight, you know. If someone steps to me in the street and starts swinging at me, I'm coming out of retirement then. So what's the point in putting one foot into retirement?
Well, you mentioned there the last 8 to 10 years, but something that I think perhaps as a younger MMA fan that has become synonymous with Dan Hardy is his analysis and his breakdown, which, to be quite honest, I would argue is second to none. Your work you do on BT Sport and also the War Room is fantastic analysis for us fans, and is only what I'm saying is only reinforced by the viewership you get. But what I want to ask you, Dan, more specifically is your analysis of fights, is that natural? Is that something that you've had to work on, or is it something that when you're watching fights, can you see certain things develop and certain aspects of a fight more naturally?
I think it's a bit of both. I think I'm fortunate enough to have a mind that finds patterns in things.
Okay.
You know, I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours doing Lego as a kid because it's quite comforting and soothing and challenging on a level that my mind needed and required. And I feel like some people have brains that work in particular ways, and mine just happens to be suited to consuming loads of information and filtering it down into pockets. It also helps that I've been doing martial arts a long while, so I do recognize things from firsthand as well. You know, like sometimes you can see the change of an eye line in an opponent and the reaction from the person they're facing, and that's something I feel like sometimes I might overlook if I'd not been in that situation myself and recognized that moment. So I think some of it's learned, I think some of it's natural, and a lot of it is obsession. A lot of it is just sitting and going through. Honestly, it frustrates me sometimes, and I'll say this to the guys that I'm working with, like, the information's there. Like, if you're fighting over in St. Preux and you get caught in a Von Flucho, you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You're an idiot, because he's landed 4 in the UFC right now.
Yeah.
If you don't wrap a guillotine up and find yourself in side control bottom and immediately let go of that guillotine, you've not done your research. Yeah. And that's free information. Now, whether people have the patience to sit down and go through it, or whether they have the mental fortitude to sit and watch their opponent and not get swept up in anxiety in their head, that's a different problem to solve. But when there's free information on the table, just absorb it as much as you can. So when I was fighting, I would always watch my opponents, and then I'd watch my own fights from my opponent's perspective and really try and pull it apart. But that was something I did instinctively for confidence. It wasn't something that I did because I'm like, okay, this is what's going to get me prepared to be an analyst when I stop fighting. Because I didn't really think I would end up here. I didn't think I would find myself in that situation. That was Dana and Lorenzo giving me the opportunity, and I'm very thankful for that. But I kind of discovered it in the process of doing the job, if that makes sense. Yeah. But now I've been doing it for a while, and I have a system and a process, and I understand how I can approach it more efficiently. I get a lot more out of it as well. So I suppose that's the learned part. The systematic part is the learned part. Yeah. There's very, very much a lot of it is just absorbing information and putting it in categories, and that's something that my brain seems to do automatically.
You mentioned there the systems and the processes. How is there any way that you could perhaps educate me on a basic level of how to watch fights? Is there any tips and tricks for an expert analysis like yourself of how someone like me could develop watching fights and analysing combat?
Well, I mean, I know you do your research anyway. I mean, I know if you're speaking to an individual, you'll watch their fights and go through their back catalogue because you want to be asking questions from an educated perspective.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. I'm probably just asking different questions. You know, my questions are, well, if the person steps to the left, then what's your reaction? If I feint a jab, then what are you going to do there? And the best thing I can suggest you do is next time you're researching a fight and you've got two individuals that you've got 4 or 5 fights of in their back catalogue, watch their last 3 or 4 fights in order. And then, so like say Charles Oliveira's fighting McGregor, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna go through McGregor's career. I'm gonna pick out the times when he's been in situations where he's been tangled up, where I feel like it might be relevant to Charles Oliveira, and I'll go through Charles Oliveira's career and see times when he struggled with good strikers that have got good takedown offense. That's because I already know those guys really well. If I didn't know either of them, I would start at the beginning of their career and I would go through step by step, and I would learn about their process as they developed it, because that gives me a better understanding of how they're going to see their opponent. But with UFC fights, because we know the guys so well generally, you know, you could probably go back and watch their last 3 fights each and try and watch Charles Oliveira from McGregor's perspective. Try and sit in a chair as McGregor watching Charles Oliveira and have the conversations in your head that you would expect McGregor to have. It's like, well, you know, he's quite quick with that lead hand, but he's not going to take me down. And then you can kind of start to unpick how they would approach the fight. And that, like, you know, same thing with Glover Teixeira. You know, it doesn't matter who he's fighting. You know what Glover Teixeira is going to do. You know, generally he's going to get pinged with a good shot and hurt, and then he's going to drag him to the floor and find his way back into it. So then, like, because I have that knowledge of him, then I can look at his opponent and go, okay, how is this person, Thiago Santos, going to fall into those traps? Well, he's going to fall into all of those traps. Yeah. He's going to hit him hard. He's going to hurt him. Then he's going to get overexcited, overzealous. He's going to end up getting taken down, and then his ground game won't hold up. Like, it's the comparison with the two, which is the difficult part. And that's what came after. Because when I was fighting, when I was actively competing, I was always putting myself into the scenario. So I'd watch one person and I would subconsciously compare them with myself. But being able to remove yourself from it and just look at them individually and then how they compare with one another, that's the easiest way of doing it. And it's literally just watching fights, making notes, watching fights. You know, you'll see things crop up over and over again. He keeps dropping his hand when he sees that, and you know, and you just build a picture that way. It's like scratching the surface off the painting that's already there.
So, for example, I'm just going to use the next example that comes to my head. The next UFC main event, Keita versus Chikadze. You would watch Chikadze's fights from you would watch Keita's fights from Chikadze's perspective, seeing how can I land that Giga kick, for example.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And then what I would do is I would say, okay, well, Chikadze's going to be able to get that kick under that rear elbow of Calvin Keita, because Keita does what Rob Font does, and he kind of hangs heavy on his lead leg, which then puts a separation between his elbow and his hip, which creates that pocket for the kick. So then I'm going, okay, but Calvin Keita's smart, and he's not going to be going in there not without a counter for that kick, without a solution to that kick. So then what's Calvin Keita's solution? Well, I would, off the top of my head, without doing the research, I would think he's going to keep that elbow tight and try and counter him with the long left hook, because Giga leaves himself on the center line. Yeah. You know what I mean? And just kind of pull him up like that. Okay. But you've got to kind of put yourself in the mind of the person as well, and also to an extent take on their ego, because you know, like if you just engage and you go back before he fought Eddie Alvarez, you've got a totally different mentality to when he came in and fought James Vick. That's his ego's in a different place. So you have to take into account that, and potentially if they're coming off 2 losses or if they're on a 6-fight win streak, where's their ego going to be at, and how is that going to change the way that they see their opponent? Because,
for example, I'm just thinking of another example. I think Oliveira, prior to the Poirier fight, his last 5 victories, 3 had been knockouts. He'd knocked out Gordon on his feet. I can't quite remember the others off the top of my head. So as a jiu-jitsu player, you could potentially assume Oliveira might be more willing to stand with a Poirier because he's got more confidence in his hand, and issues such as that. That is so insightful and so insightful for my watching. So I thank you for that. Really do.
No.
I want to just, as a little bit of a game, let's just play a little bit of a imaginative game. Who are your three favourite fighters to watch and to analyse and to pull apart their game? Let's imagine me and you are stuck in a room with a television for 24 hours and you could only pick three fighters' catalogues to watch through. Who would be the first names that are coming to mind?
Are we talking specifically UFC, MMA, UFC?
Let's open it up to anyone.
Okay. Well, my first pick, and to be honest, I was kind of spoiled with this one because they fought against one another. But Peter Yan and Corey Sandhagen are two of my top picks right now in MMA. I love Peter Yan's style, but I feel like Corey Sandhagen is a glimpse into the future. Even though it's not working quite right now, I feel like he's leveled up. Dominic Cruz looked fantastic the other night as well. But I feel like we're seeing inklings with Sandhagen and with Cruz and a little bit with Dillashaw sometimes. We're seeing where the future of MMA movement goes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my first pick would be Corey Sandhagen because he's got such a fluidity to his striking and his grappling. He's very good at switching the fight on a sixpence and turning it on his opponent. So as soon as he starts to lose control, he's got something that he throws in to create an attack. He's got a fascinating style right now. The other one I'm obsessed with at the moment is Naoya Inoue. You know, the Japanese boxer.
Yeah.
He is just the way that he delivers his clean individual punches is a thing of beauty. And what I'm getting away from now is, because I hear a lot of coaches call it, I hear a lot of people say it, you've got to throw combinations. You don't throw combinations. You throw chains of single shots is what you do. If you throw the first punch and it doesn't land the way it's supposed to, or it doesn't get the reaction that you're supposed to, then throwing the next shot's only going to get you in more trouble. Yeah. Like the idea of throwing combinations is starting to become quite an alien thing to me. Now I'm more focused on chains of individual shots. And if you look at someone like Naoya Inoue, and Canelo does this so well as well, I could use him as an example all the time. They think about the individual shot that they want to land and what supplementary movements they need to make sure that individual shot lands. And that might be a feint to an individual shot, to another feint to an individual shot, to a touch to keep the hands in a position to throw the next shot. Instead of them just going, bang, 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 and throwing power into everything, the delivery of the individual shots. Sandhagen, when he knocked out Marlon Moraes with the spinning head kick, same kind of situation, set it up perfectly. I mean, I'm giving you a long answer here, but I would say Sandhagen, Naoya Inoue for boxing for sure. Naoya Inoue. I was watching him yesterday. And then, I mean, I'm really enjoying Marat Grigorian's style as well at the moment. He's currently in signed with One Championship, a fantastic, very, very high level kickboxer. But there's something that he does really well, which is the lead hook to the body against someone of an opposite stance. I think it was against Alazov, his debut in One Championship, but you can see it there. He was hammering him to the lead rib. And it's just a punch that's a very awkward one to land. Same as the Chris Eubank rear uppercut that Masato does so well. Really awkward shots to land, but because they do them so easily, I get kind of hooked on the finer details of it. But yeah, I move back and forth through combat sports all the time, and I'll have a day where I'll obsess about someone. Like I know next week I'm going to obsess about Manny Pacquiao because I've already decided, you know. And I'll spend the day.
Will you set your week? You'll set your time out in advance of who you're going to spend a little bit of a focus on.
I have like a list in the back of my head, and like if I'm having a conversation with someone. Like today, I was having a conversation in the gym about a particular technique we were drilling, and I was talking about Andre Muniz and his win over Eric Anders and Jacare, where he broke Jacare's arm. And there's a particular style of technique that he's using with his armbar, which not many other people are using. And I think it's a very, very useful style for MMA. So I'll spend a couple of hours watching him tomorrow morning and make a bunch of notes on his style and stuff. And usually it's stuff that presents itself. I'm lucky because I've got such a back catalogue from all the years that if someone asks me a question or if someone does something and I think to myself, you know what, that might be a useful thing for you to add into your game, I'll be able to go check this person out in this fight against this person and it will give you an idea. And I think that saves me a lot of time as well, being able to just kind of pull those names out the back of my head and go, this person, this style would suit you. And, you know, especially with working with a team of guys, I can I can liken their styles to people that might be able to learn from.
One thing I wanted to mention there, because two of the names you brought up, Jan and Canelo, one thing that I've noticed just from a more basic aspect is this really quite stoic stance that both of them have, where they pressure their opponents back. They do feint and they will throw fakes and feints, but there's not a lot of linear movement. It's quite, as I mentioned, stoic and almost waiting for the perfect counter. And that's one thing that I'm seeing. I see it a little bit in Rodtang Jitmungnon. This very stoic approach to the fight game of pressuring your opponent back to where you want them, whether it be a ring or a cage or whatever, and then throwing the perfect shot.
Well, I think it's an interesting algorithm that some people have found in MMA, and it's a weakness in the MMA game, is the truth of it. So, and Rodtang is a great example, as is Peter Yan, as is Gennady Golovkin, or Julio Cesar Chavez, or Ramon Dekkers, guys that are heavy front foot fighters that are comfortable in punching range without a step. So, like, if you think of the different ranges that you've got, we'll talk specifically for MMA for this. You've got step to kick range. You've got kick range, where you don't have to step to kick. You've got step to punch range, which is usually the same as standing kick range. And then you've got boxing range, where you can put your hands on the person without taking a step. That range is like heel hooks for jiu-jitsu. Like what Danaher has done with his death squad and with their attack on the lower body is what Peter Yan is doing in MMA right now. He's standing in a range that gives people a level of 15% anxiety without doing anything. Right? And that's why he doesn't have to do much. Now, on the flip side, Rodtang actually does quite a lot. He actually doesn't allow you to throw your techniques because he's so busy. But Canelo and Peter Yan have got that very, very similar style, where I'm going to put myself into your punching range so you feel like you have to do something. And then when I'm not doing anything back, that makes you even more uncomfortable. It makes it even easier for me to defend because I'm only focusing on what you're doing. I'm not focusing on what I'm doing. Another really good example of this, and probably one of the best performances of it recently, was Mads Burnell in his fight against Emmanuel Sanchez. Because Mads Burnell loves the Philly shell style. He loves to be in that pocket where he rolls stuff off his shoulders. And that's a very uncomfortable range for most people. Like if I watch guys sparring in the gym, or if I go to the Cage Warriors Academy show, for example, where you've got the amateurs coming up, they go long range outside where they feel kind of safe, but kind of like they can snipe at their opponent, all the way into over under, and now we're wrestling. And that space where you go, no, I'm not clinching you. I'm just going to stand right on your front foot. That's the point where the majority of fighters start to go, oh no, I don't like this. They can't find space from it. Like Sanchez against Mads Burnell exhausted himself because he felt like he had to throw. Because he had to do something to stop his opponent walking forward. So, same thing with Sandhagen against Peter Yan. Same thing with Peter Yan against Aljamain Sterling. Walked him down. Aljamain Sterling was winning, but only because he had to be throwing strikes, not because he wanted to be. He was doing it under duress, which was winning the fight for Peter Yan in the long run. But it's that you're very correct in that short range space, which makes people uncomfortable. But next time you see someone do it, think about the Danaher Death Squad attacking heel hooks and how quickly people panic and tap.
I've never thought about it like that, but it makes perfect sense when you see the likes of Gordon Ryan, and as you mentioned, the Death Squads. That real duress that they put people under. That's something I've never quite thought about, but just the added anxiety by someone being so near, and as I mentioned, probably being so stoic, it probably is quite an uncomfortable scenario.
Exactly that. I always say to the guys at my gym, fight out of a good defense. Like start off fighting out of a good defense, and then when you start to feel your opponent slow down, you start moving forward, but don't do anything. Walk them down without doing anything, because most people will try and throw to keep you off. Most people will punch instead of move, which means that they're just going to punch himself out. One of my other favorite finishes, BJ Penn against Sean Shirk. Like you back Sean Shirk up against the fence, and you know full well he's going down. He's not moving left or right. So BJ Penn baited him onto that knee. He made the decision to level change under duress, under pressure. He didn't want to do it, but because he didn't want to do it, it was predictable, and that's why BJ caught him with the knee.
let's very quickly for one final round of topic. Let's talk about British MMA because we're obviously two Brits. We're very passionate on the subject. Dan, we have 6 Brits in the UFC rankings at the moment: Paul Craig, Joe Calderwood, Till, Aspinall, Edwards, and Arnold Allen. Who wins a world title first? Who brings home the second British belt?
Oh,
if I give you a free bet, let's say a £3,000 bet, who's your money on?
That's a tough one. I think technically Leon's got the best shot with his skills based on where he is in the division, but it's a very, very tough division.
Yeah,
I'd say Leon is my top pick, but closely behind that is Tom Aspinall. I think Aspinall could really make waves in this division and just make his way through heavyweight and find himself within. I mean, look at Cyril Gane, where he's at right now.
Yeah.
Like it would be much easier for Tom Aspinall to make waves at heavyweight and get himself a title shot than Leon would. But I think if Leon gets the shot, I think he's got a higher statistic of winning the belt, if that makes sense. I think it's a bit up in the air at heavyweight when you get to the top level, whereas Leon's skills show through. And the other one, my safe bet would be Jack Shaw.
Yeah,
that's my safe bet. I don't think he's in the rankings at the moment.
He's not. No.
But he's my safe bet because I could sit and watch that guy every day of the week. He's got such a calmness in his mind and such a skill set, as well as a hell of a team around him. A lot of people invested in him, wanting him to do well. I think for me, Jack Shaw is probably going to be the next person to bring a belt back to this country. But the closest right now, I would say, is Leon. And if I was putting a free bet on Leon, I'd get my money.
There seems to be a plethora of Brits in the UFC at featherweight, obviously. Oh, Jack Shaw is bantamweight, excuse me, but we've got Jack at bantamweight, we've got Arnold Allen, and someone who's really impressing me at the moment is Lerone Murphy. I really think in the next 12 to 18 months he could really be a player at featherweight.
Yeah, I'm again a big fan of his style. The one thing that's going to hold Lerone back, and this is something he could learn from Leon, is he don't like to talk too much.
Yeah.
And it's not, you don't have to be a trash talker. But I watched his interview on with Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour, and I think 5 out of 10 answers were, I don't know, and he just kept saying that. I'm like, dude, like tell people the story, open up. It's what we're going. What we're talking about with Jake Paul. Give people a reason to be invested in you. Win or lose, it doesn't matter. Give people a reason to watch, and I think that's where Leon struggled so much. I think with Till, he's a very polarizing character anyway, which is why he got the main event in London over Leon. Is because he does garner that interest. It doesn't mean that Leon can't. It doesn't mean that Lerone Murphy can't, or Tom Aspinall, or any of the other boys. It doesn't mean they can't. But there is certainly a bit of effort to be made in that direction. I mean, look at what Paddy Pimblett's doing with one fight in the UFC. Like you can cancel his Twitter one day and he sets it up the next, and he's already got more than most of the guys we've talked about in the rankings. It's the demographic that we're dealing with at the moment. But you've got to speak to those people because they're the ones that buy your pay-per-views.
There's obviously been a lot of discussion, a lot of talk about the reasoning behind why Leon hasn't had the world title fight. Yeah. Do you think part of it is a worry from the company's side that Leon is a real player and could perhaps upset Usman, but isn't the marketable name that they want at a premier division at welterweight?
I think a big part of the problem is hanging a belt over someone's shoulder that's not going to do a very good job of promoting that belt. Because as much as it's the UFC's job to promote the person holding the belt, it's the person holding the belt's job to promote their division.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, Usman's got a very marketable brand. It's different. Again, it's not the McGregor brand in any way, but it's a very marketable brand. He dresses well. He's very quietly spoken, but he's very assertive in the way that he does things, and his fighting style is really starting to deliver. With Leon, his fighting style absolutely delivers, but then you put a mic in front of him and he doesn't sell himself. He doesn't have much to say for himself. And I think that's a real shame, because if I had the skills that he's got, you wouldn't be able to shut me up. It's the same with Tom Breeze. Tom Breeze is, in my opinion, one of the best mixed martial artists that we've ever had come out of the UK. But most people won't know about it because most people won't hear from him. And that, in my opinion, is a real shame, because like, we're prize fighters and the prize is bigger if people want to see the fight. But the prize at the same time is also opportunities in mixed martial arts. And you might not get the big purse, but you might not get the opportunity either if you can't talk yourself into that spot. Like how Leon got slapped up by Masvidal and didn't get that fight immediately afterwards is only down to the fact that Leon didn't push for it.
Yeah,
I can't think of any other way around it, because if it had been the other way around, Masvidal wouldn't have shut up.
Yeah,
you know,
couldn't agree more.
I think some fighters, we get a little bit stubborn, because I never used to want to sell tickets. When I was fighting at Cage Warriors, they'd be like, "Oh, sell some tickets. Will you do your ticket deal?" I'm like, "I'm not interested in it. Let me just focus on coming and fighting." The industry's changed now. You know, you've got to not only invest in yourself in time wise, but you've also got to invest in yourself in belief.
Yeah.
Like, I need to convince you that I'm going to win. And I need to convince you so hard that I'm going to win that if you don't believe me, you can't wait for me to lose. But I, first and foremost, need you to have an opinion. And if you don't, I'm not going to get those doors off. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I'm not going to get those doors open.
That's the quote I always say: is in one way or the other, you've got to make the fans give a shit. You've got to make the fans want to turn on, because, as we mentioned off camera, there's so much combat sport at the moment that you've got to be, here's the reason why you're going to tune in, pay your money and watch me.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, it's not like it's a difficult sport to sell. I mean, like, if I walked out into the street outside my house and punched somebody, we'd have a crowd within a couple of seconds. Like, if there's an instinct in it, it's like, oh, hang on, what's going to happen here?
Yeah.
Someone's going to get laid out. You know, like, there's an instinct that we want to watch fighting. We want to watch it even more when one of the people going in, or both the people, even better, go into the fight fully 100% believing they're going to win. Because then we sit on the outside going, well, I don't know. They both seem pretty sure they're going to win. This is going to be really interesting. Like, it's with the, and I don't mean to pick on Leon in any way, but the Masvidal situation at the O2 was a good example, because he didn't make enough noise after it had happened. People are already checked out.
Yeah.
Whether the fight happens or not, and we know full well that if that fight happens, Leon's most likely going to come out on top. I think he's a better fighter. But most people won't be interested in watching it because he's already lost.
Yeah.
Because he didn't swing back at him, swing back at somebody, throw something at him. I don't know. Like, you need to get these fights. You need to create these opportunities for yourself. One thing I've seen, since the weekend, it has not stopped popping up on my phone, and I think it's hilarious, is Nate Diaz punking someone, throwing a drink all over themselves.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, okay, fair enough. It might be a bit of a dick move. I don't know the story. I don't know who the individual was or what, but it's just it's that kind of, oh shit, look at what that guy's doing. That's what Jake Paul's made a career out of. Like, we can learn. We don't need to go the full Triller hog. We don't need to go all the way down that way. But if I'm Leon and I'm sitting there in my house in Birmingham watching these guys get opportunities over me, it's pissing me off to a point where I am going to start calling names out. And if you don't do that, it doesn't put the impression across that you believe you can do it.
Of course. Listen, Dan, I want to finish by asking you one final question. I want to turn the conversation back to yourself.
Okay.
We're in the end of 2021 now. What does an ideal 2022 look like for Dan Hardy? Where do you want to be in the next 12 months?
I'd like to be end of 2022. I'd like to have stepped in to compete 3 times under different rule sets, ideally.
Yeah.
I want my new gym open, and I want the team. Well, I mean, we should have been 12-0 this year. We dropped a couple of fights, but I want my team to be on a really strong win streak towards the end of the year. That's my main focus. But to do that alongside me competing, I would very much like to fight again this year. Very much so. Fantastic.
Well, that is very much a tantalising thought for presumably UK fans, but all fans. And I just want to thank you for your time this evening, and thank you for a fantastic conversation.
No worries, mate. It's been good talking to you. I apologise again for the delay. It took us so long to get to this stage, but now we've connected, we'll speak again.
No problem. Before we finish, Dan, how can people find you and any projects you're involved with on social media? The floor is yours for anything you want to sign off with.
Just check out Dan Hardy MMA, Twitter and Instagram, Dan Hardy MMA, and then everything I do is through Full Reptile. So Full Reptile YouTube channel is where all the war rooms and podcasts and stuff are, and then Full Reptile Collective is all the clothing. And we've got new gloves and new rash guards and spats and stuff coming out next year. So lots going on with that as well. Make sure you check that out.
Fantastic. Great talking to you today, Dan.
Nice one, mate.